It began on a night when the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Snow fell like ash over the barbed wire, settling on the watchtowers and the hollow-eyed prisoners below, inside the infirmary. A dim yellow light flickered against the frost-stained window. The German nurse, Anna Keller, pressed her hands against a bloodied bandage, her fingers trembling not from the cold, but from what she had just done. She had lied to her superior officer, reporting the man before her as deceased. He wasn't. The prisoner, number 7431, a Jewish violinist named David Rosenfeld, was still breathing, barely. Before we dive in, welcome, where we dive deep into the hidden, forbidden and shocking stories of World War II. We uncover the dark truths and emotional tales that textbooks leave out. Subscribe now and join a community that explores history's most haunting moments. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story from the past that still echoes today. Anna didn't know why she did it. Perhaps it was the look in his eyes when he begged, hoarse and broken, "Please?" Not yet. She was supposed to be efficient, detached. That was what her training demanded. But she saw something in him. Something human in a place designed to erase humanity. She wrapped his wound tighter and whispered for him to stay silent. Outside, the sound of boots echoed through the snow. She extinguished the lantern. For months, she had walked a thin line between duty and conscience, assigned to the medical barracks at a subcamp near Krakow. Anna had witnessed things she could never forget. Men with frostbite left to rot, children treated like experiments, officers laughing as they burned files to hide the truth. But the violinist, he was different. His arrival weeks earlier had disrupted her routine. He had been dragged in after a beating. His ribs cracked, his hands mangled, yet even as she cleaned his wounds, he whispered to himself the melodies of Schubert. It was madness, she thought then, to sing in a place like this, but that defiance stayed with her. That night, when she marked him as deceased and moved his body to a side room, she felt something inside her shift. For the first time, she was the one breaking the rules, and that act, small, dangerous, unthinkable, was the beginning of everything. The following days were a blur of silence and fear. David remained hidden behind a stack of supply crates, breathing shallowly, his face ghostly pale. She fed him scraps of bread, spoonfuls of soup meant for the nurses. Each moment was a risk. The guards conducted random inspections, and Dr. Vogel, the camp physician, prowled the infirmary with a clipboard and a cold smile. One discovery meant death, for both of them. Yet somehow, amid the chaos, they survived another day. When David regained enough strength to sit up, he tried to speak, but Anna silenced him with a finger to her lips. She looked around, ensuring no one was near, then whispered, "You shouldn't be alive." His cracked lips curved into a faint smile. "Then maybe that's why I am," he murmured. It was the first time she had smiled in months. Outside, the world continued to burn. The winter of 1944 was merciless. The Red Army was advancing from the east, and the German command was tightening its grip. Fear ruled everything, the prisoners, the guards, even the officers. Everyone sensed the end approaching, though no one dared to say it aloud. In that collapsing world, two people who should have been enemies began to share whispers in the dark. Anna learned he had been a violinist in Warsaw before the war, performing in cafes and theatres until the walls closed in. He told her about his sister, taken away during a roundup, and his mother, who had begged him to survive no matter what. "I promised her," he said quietly, staring at the floor. "I don't know if I can still keep that promise." Anna didn't answer. She couldn't. Her own brother had died on the Eastern Front, his last letter filled with empty patriotism and the word honor. Now she wondered what any of it meant. Days turned into weeks. Every stolen glance, every whispered exchange carried the weight of death. Yet within that fragile secrecy a strange tenderness grew. When she touched his bandaged hand, he didn't pull away. When he told her, in halting German, that she had a face the world had forgotten how to see, she turned away before he could see her tears. But the danger was constant. One evening, as Anna was smuggling extra rations to his hiding place, a guard entered unexpectedly. She froze. The man's flashlight swept across the room, pausing inches from the crate where David hid. Anna's heart hammered so hard she thought the sound would give them away. Then, by some miracle, the guard's radio crackled. A call from the gate. He cursed, turned, and left. Only then did she breathe again. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, trembling. From behind the crates, David whispered, "You risk everything." She looked at him through tears. "So do you." Their lives became a rhythm of deception and fleeting hope. She forged medical logs, erased names, traded morphine for bread on the black market, all to keep him alive. Every night she wondered how long they could continue before someone noticed. The snow outside had turned to slush, the once orderly camp descending into chaos as rumors of the Soviet advance spread. Officers fled with stolen gold and records, the guards drunk on fear and desperation. In that unraveling world, their secret began to feel almost inevitable. One night, after a raid brought in dozens of new prisoners, Anna found herself cornered by Vogel. His eyes, sharp and suspicious, lingered too long on her trembling hands. "You've been acting strange lately, Fräulein Keller," he said softly. "I hope it's not sentimentality." She forced a polite smile, the kind women learned to wear in the Reich. "Just exhaustion, Herr Doctor." He studied her a moment longer, then walked away, but she knew he didn't believe her. That night, she went to David, tears burning her eyes. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "They're watching me." He looked at her, weak but determined. "Then we leave." She almost laughed. "Leave? From here?" But the look in his eyes silenced her. He meant it. He'd rather die trying to escape than wait for the inevitable bullet or gas. And though she knew it was madness, something inside her broke free. "If we're caught," she said, "they'll hang us both." He nodded. "Then let them hang us together." For a long moment, neither spoke. The infirmary was silent but for the sound of distant gunfire, echoing from the eastern horizon. Somewhere out there, the war was ending, but in this small, forgotten corner of hell, something else had begun, a fragile, forbidden love born from the ashes of humanity. Anna pressed her forehead against his, her voice trembling. "If they find you alive, they'll know I helped you." He whispered back, "Then they'll know someone here still remembered how to be human." In that moment she realized she wasn't just saving him anymore. He was saving her, from obedience, from indifference, from the kind of soul death that had swallowed everyone else. And as the sound of distant artillery rolled across the frozen fields, she made her decision. Tomorrow she would steal a uniform. Tomorrow they would try. But tonight they allowed themselves one brief, impossible moment of peace. In the dark, beneath the whisper of falling snow, Anna Keller and David Rosenfeld, enemy and prisoner, nurse and condemned man, shared the one thing this war had tried so hard to destroy: hope. The morning of their planned escape arrived with a silence that felt unnatural. The sky hung low and grey, pressing down on the camp like a weight. Smoke from the crematorium drifted lazily across the barbed wire, mixing with the bitter scent of burning coal. Anna stood at the infirmary window, her hands trembling as she buttoned her grey coat. Every movement felt mechanical. Behind her, David sat on the cot, dressed in the tattered remains of a German uniform she had pieced together from discarded scraps. It was far too large for him, but under the dim light he could almost pass for one of the wounded guards. Almost. She turned to face him. "You remember what to say?" He nodded weakly, his face pale but resolute. "I'm being transferred to Krakow for treatment." "You're escorting me." His voice wavered as he repeated the line she had drilled into him through sleepless nights. Anna forced a smile. "Good. Keep your head down. Don't look at anyone longer than you have to." Her own words sounded distant, like someone else's orders. The truth was, she was terrified. At 5:40 the barracks bell rang. Outside, the prisoners shuffled into lines, their breath rising like ghosts in the freezing dawn. Guards barked commands while dogs strained at their leashes. Anna slipped into the corridor, heart pounding. She had falsified a medical transport order, signed with Vogel's forged signature. A dangerous gamble. If anyone checked, it would be over. She adjusted her armband, motioned for David to follow, and stepped into the icy wind. They walked toward the gate. Every step felt like walking on a knife's edge. The world around them was mechanical precision, boots marching, chains rattling, the low moans of the sick. A sentry at the gate looked up. "Transport order," he demanded. Anna handed him the paper with gloved hands, keeping her gaze steady. The guard squinted at the document, then at David. "What's wrong with him?" Anna replied smoothly, "Head injury, shell fragment, unfit for labor." The guard grunted, flipping the paper over. Seconds stretched like hours. Finally, he shrugged and waved them through. "Go, but report to command when you return." The moment the gate closed behind them, Anna felt her knees weaken. The camp, with its towers and fences, began to fade behind a thin veil of snow. They had done it, or at least the first part. She dared not celebrate. Ahead lay 10 miles of occupied territory, minefields, patrols, and the bitter cold. But for the first time, there was no barbed wire between them and freedom. They followed the frozen road through the forest. The snow muffled their footsteps, but every snapping twig made Anna flinch. David struggled to keep up, his breathing ragged. The cold gnawed at their bones. She gave him her gloves, though her own fingers were already numb. "We'll rest by the river," she whispered. "There's an abandoned farmhouse. We can stay there until nightfall." By noon, the wind had grown cruel. The world was a blur of white and grey. David stumbled more than once, and Anna had to steady him. "You should have left me," he muttered through chattering teeth. "You could have lived." She shook her head fiercely. "Don't say that, not after what we've seen." For her, going back wasn't living. It was returning to a world of silence and obedience. Out here, even if death waited, it felt more honest. They reached the farmhouse, a crumbling ruin half buried in snow. Inside, broken furniture and shattered glass littered the floor. She lit a candle from her pocket, its tiny flame trembling like their hope. David sank onto a pile of straw, his breath shallow. She checked his wounds. The bleeding had reopened. She tore strips from her underskirt to bind them again. When he tried to stop her, she whispered, "If we die together." But not yet. For a while, there was only the sound of wind howling through the cracks. Anna sat beside him, her hands raw and red. He looked at her, the woman who had once been his captor, and saw something he hadn't seen in years: gentleness. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. She hesitated. "Because I couldn't keep pretending. Every day in that camp, I told myself I was serving my country. But what country demands you stop feeling?" He reached for her hand, his touch weak but warm. "You didn't save me," he whispered. "You saved what's left of the world." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but part of her new redemption was not that simple. Outside, artillery thundered faintly in the distance, the war crawling closer with every hour. That night, as darkness swallowed the forest, Anna couldn't sleep. She watched David's face in the candlelight, peaceful for the first time. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to imagine another life, a world where she was a nurse in a quiet town, and he was a musician playing by a window, laughter echoing down the street. But dreams were dangerous things. Reality always came back with teeth. At dawn, they were awakened by voices, German soldiers. Anna froze, extinguishing the candle. Through a crack in the wall, she saw 3 figures trudging through the snow, rifles slung across their shoulders. They were close, too close. She motioned for David to stay silent. Her heart hammered as the soldiers approached the door. One of them kicked it open, scanning the dark interior. Anna's hand gripped the small pistol she had stolen from the infirmary. "Anyone here?" one of the soldiers called out. She stepped into the dim light, her voice calm. "Medical Officer Anna Keller. I'm treating an injured transport case." The men exchanged glances. "At this hour? Out here?" Their suspicion was immediate. One moved toward the corner where David hid beneath a torn blanket. Anna's hand tightened on the pistol. Time slowed. She could hear her pulse, the snow, the creak of the soldier's boots. Just as his hand reached for the blanket, an explosion echoed in the distance. Artillery fire, closer than before. The men turned, shouting to each other. "Russians!" One barked. Without another word, they ran back toward the road. When silence returned, Anna's legs gave out. David crawled from his hiding spot, pulling her into his arms. "They'll be back," she gasped. "We have to keep moving." He nodded, helping her stand. Outside, the sky burned red in the east. The front line was approaching fast. They moved through the forest again, exhausted but alive. Every step was agony, yet neither spoke of stopping. By afternoon, they reached a river half frozen under jagged ice. Across it lay the ruins of another village, smoke rising from the chimneys. Anna scanned the horizon. If we cross, we might find partisans or Soviet scouts. It's our only chance. David hesitated. If they find you with me? She cut him off. I'll tell them the truth, that I saved a man, that once, even here, there was something worth saving. He stared at her, and in that moment, the fear seemed to fade. They stepped onto the ice together. The surface groaned beneath their weight, cracking with every step. Halfway across, the sound of engines shattered the silence. German trucks approaching the bridge. Anna's eyes met David's. There was no time. Run, she shouted. The ice broke beneath them. For an instant the world vanished into freezing water and darkness. She felt his hand slip from hers. Then, through the chaos, she grasped it again, pulling, fighting, gasping for air. When they broke the surface, both were trembling violently but alive. On the opposite shore, she collapsed in the snow, sobbing. He pulled her close, whispering through blue lips, "We made it." But in her heart, she knew the truth. Escape was never that simple. They had survived the camp, the guards, the river, yet the world they were walking into was still on fire. And the love that had saved them might also be the thing that would destroy them. Both. The next morning arrived shrouded in mist. The forest was eerily still, and the river they had crossed the night before glimmered like a silver scar in the grey dawn. Anna awoke to the sound of distant artillery, low, rolling thunder that seemed to echo from another world. Her clothes were still damp from the icy water, and every breath sent a shiver through her chest. David sat beside her near the remnants of a small fire, his face pale and drawn. His cough had worsened during the night. Each time he exhaled, it sounded like pain itself leaving his lungs. Anna moved closer, placing a trembling hand on his shoulder. "You need warmth," she whispered. "You'll get pneumonia." He smiled faintly. "We both will." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "No," she said quietly, as if the word itself could defy the war. "We didn't come this far to die in the snow." They found shelter in a half-collapsed barn on the edge of the village. The smell of burned wood hung in the air, another reminder that the war had passed through here not long ago. There were signs of struggle, broken glass, bullet holes in the walls, a child's shoe lying abandoned near the door. Anna gathered what scraps she could. Old cloth, bits of hay, and built a fire from the splintered wood. When the first sparks caught, she closed her eyes, whispering a prayer she hadn't dared say in years. David watched her in silence. "You still believe?" he asked softly. She hesitated before answering. "I used to believe in Germany," she said, "in order, in obedience. I thought it meant civilization. Now I don't know what that word means anymore." Her voice faltered. "Maybe belief is just what keeps us from breaking." He looked at her with something like sorrow. "Then don't stop believing. Not yet." For a while they said nothing. The fire crackled weakly, and outside snow began to fall again. Through the broken window, Anna saw movement, shadows gliding between the ruins, her body tensed. "Someone's out there," she whispered. David instinctively reached for a piece of wood, holding it like a weapon. A moment later the door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, a man in a Soviet uniform, his rifle raised. "Don't move!" he shouted in accented German. Anna froze, hands raised. The soldier's eyes darted between her and David, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Who are you?" Anna swallowed hard. "Medical officer," she said quickly. "We escaped the camp. He's a prisoner." The soldier hesitated. Behind him, 2 more Red Army soldiers entered, younger and thinner, their faces wary but curious. "Camp?" one of them asked. "Which one?" "Schwarzfeld," she replied. The name alone made them exchange glances. One of the soldiers muttered something in Russian, too low to catch. Then the first man stepped closer, lowering his weapon slightly. "You helped him?" he asked, nodding toward David. Anna nodded. "Yes." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then the soldier gave a slow, weary sigh. "Then maybe you're not the enemy," he said. "But you shouldn't stay here. The front is moving fast. The Germans will try to retake this road." They followed the soldiers to a makeshift camp hidden deeper in the forest. It was a ragged group. Partisans, defectors, villagers who had lost everything. The leader, an older man with a scar down his cheek, studied them both. You were SS? He asked Anna sharply. No, she said firmly. Nurse. He glanced at David, then back at her. Strange time for compassion. She met his gaze without flinching. Strange time to be human. That answer seemed to please him. You can rest here tonight, he said, but at dawn we move east. They were given a corner of a tent and a pot of thin soup. Anna sat close to David, holding his hand as he tried to eat. Around them, the partisans spoke in low tones about coming battles, about rumours that the Germans were retreating. Yet, even among supposed allies, she could feel the suspicion in their eyes. A German woman among them. It was a dangerous thing. More than once, she caught someone whispering behind her back. Later that night, when the camp fell silent, she turned to David. They don't trust me, she said softly. They shouldn't, he replied gently. You were one of them. His tone wasn't cruel, just honest. But you're not anymore, he added. That's what they don't understand. Outside, the wind howled through the forest. Anna lay awake, staring at the tent ceiling. She could feel the weight of everything pressing down. The lies she'd told, the men she'd deceived, the lives she hadn't saved. For all her defiance, guilt had become a constant companion. It whispered to her in the dark, reminding her that redemption always demanded a price. When she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, she dreamed of the infirmary, the smell of disinfectant, the sound of boots, the faces of the dying. But in the dream, David stood among them, reaching for her hand. We have to go, he said, before they find us. She woke with a start, heart racing, and realized it wasn't just a dream. Outside, voices were shouting. Anna pushed aside the tent flap and froze. In the distance, flashes of light tore through the fog, artillery fire. The ground shook beneath them. Someone yelled in Russian, "They're coming!" Chaos erupted. The German army had launched a counterattack. Anna grabbed David's arm. We have to move! The partisans scattered in every direction, the forest filling with gunfire. Bullets hissed through the trees. Anna and David ran, stumbling over roots and snow, their breath ragged. Around them, the night blazed with orange and red. They found a trench and threw themselves inside. Anna clutched him close as shells exploded nearby. Dirt rained down on them, the air thick with smoke and screams. They're pushing east, David shouted over the roar. If we stay here, we'll die. She nodded, eyes burning. Then we go west, back toward the village. It was madness, but they had no choice. They crawled through the mud, moving from shadow to shadow. The forest was alive with fire and fear. They passed a fallen soldier, a boy, no older than 17, his hand still gripping his rifle. Anna wanted to close his eyes, but David pulled her away. There's no time. By dawn, the firing had faded. Smoke drifted through the trees like fog. They stumbled into the ruins of another farmhouse, half collapsed and burning at the edges. Anna sank to the floor, gasping, her hands covered in mud and blood. David sat beside her, his body trembling. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. When silence finally returned, Anna looked at him. His eyes were distant, unfocused. We can't keep running, she whispered. We have to find somewhere safe. He smiled weakly. Safe? There's no such place anymore. For a long time they just sat there, the firelight flickering over their faces. Anna reached for his hand, feeling the cold in his fingers. We've lost everything, she said quietly. Everyone we knew, everything we believed in. He looked at her, eyes filled with exhaustion and tenderness. Then maybe it's time to build something new. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the footprints of the dead. Inside, two souls who should never have met, who should never have cared for one another, clung to the fragile illusion that they still had a future. For the first time, Anna allowed herself to cry, not for her country, not for her lost faith, but for the small, impossible hope that had survived where nothing else could. In that moment, surrounded by ruin, the war felt both endless and far away, and for the first time since it began, she whispered the truth aloud. I love you. David's eyes softened. Then we've already won. But as the dawn rose red over the shattered horizon, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that fate was still following close behind. The morning light crept through the broken windows of the farmhouse, pale and trembling, like a hesitant witness to the horrors outside. Anna sat on the floor, her back against the wall, listening to David breathe. He had not slept, and his cough was worse than ever, raw and wet from the dampness that had followed them since their flight. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, revealing the black, frozen earth beneath. The war had left nothing untouched. Fields were cratered from artillery, trees splintered, and bodies half buried in snowdrifts or mud. It was a landscape that spoke of death, yet somehow, amid it, they clung to the fragile warmth of life. Anna moved to the small stove they had managed to light and stirred the thin broth she had made the night before. It wasn't much, barely enough to nourish them, but it would have to do. She brought it to David, who took it in shaking hands. Every sip was a struggle, every breath a reminder of how close he had come to death. "You shouldn't have done this," he whispered hoarsely, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Stayed behind to save me." She knelt beside him, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "I couldn't not do it," she said softly. "I couldn't watch them destroy you, destroy us, destroy what little humanity was left." She looked away, ashamed that her voice trembled. The truth was, she had acted not only out of compassion but from a need she couldn't name, a bond forged in the darkest of places, stronger than fear, suspicion, or even reason. Outside, the sound of artillery was distant but constant, a low drum that had become part of their reality. The front lines were shifting rapidly, German forces retreating in disarray, while Soviet units advanced, taking everything in their path. Villages were burned, roads clogged with refugees and abandoned vehicles, soldiers surrendering or fleeing in panic. In this chaos, Anna and David were ghosts, moving through the remnants of a world that had forgotten them, carrying with them a secret that could destroy both if discovered. By mid-morning, Anna decided they could not stay in the farmhouse any longer. It was isolated, yes, but that also meant that anyone passing, soldiers, deserters, scavengers, could find them at any moment. "We have to move," she said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion that weighed down every limb. David nodded, wrapping himself tightly in the stolen uniform coat. Each step outside reminded them of their vulnerability. The snow had begun to soften, leaving deep footprints, evidence of their presence for anyone who might follow. They travelled slowly, staying close to the tree line, avoiding open fields whenever possible. Each mile was a struggle. David's injuries slowed them, his breathing ragged in the cold, and Anna's muscles ached from days of running and carrying supplies. Yet in that shared struggle there was a rhythm, a strange intimacy born of necessity and survival. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word carried the weight of life itself. By late afternoon they reached a small village, mostly abandoned, with signs of hurried evacuation everywhere. Houses were empty, doors ajar, furniture overturned. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys where civilians had stayed behind, hiding in attics or cellars. Anna guided David into the remains of a bakery, where she found sacks of flour and broken barrels of food. She whispered assurances as she worked, trying to preserve a semblance of hope. They ate slowly, cautiously, aware that the slightest noise could draw attention. As night fell, the temperature dropped, frost forming on every surface. They huddled together for warmth, the thin walls offering little protection from the wind that whistled through broken windows. David's cough worsened, and Anna's fear grew with every rasping breath. "We need a doctor," she whispered, though she knew none would come for them willingly. Their survival had become a delicate balance of hiding and improvising, of evading both armies while tending to injuries that grew more dangerous by the day. In the darkness, she allowed herself to remember their first nights together, back in the infirmary, when fear and compassion had intertwined into something forbidden, yet utterly human. She remembered the quiet moments when David had played the air of a violin in his mind, the notes a ghostly echo of the world that had existed before the war. Those memories were precious, fleeting, and painful reminders of the life they had been denied. Yet they were also anchors, holding them to a fragile sense of purpose in a world that seemed determined to swallow them whole. The following days were a blur of cautious movement. They travelled at dawn and dusk, resting during the day in barns, cellars, or abandoned cottages. Each encounter with soldiers, German or Soviet, brought danger and tension, yet Anna's forged credentials and quick thinking kept them safe for the most part. She learned to read the signs of suspicion, to anticipate questions, to suppress the fear that threatened to paralyze her. David, despite his weakened state, adapted as well, learning to move silently to answer when prompted, and to rely entirely on her judgment. Yet survival was not enough to quiet the storm between them. Fear and desperation had a way of magnifying emotions. They argued at times, their words sharp and cutting, a reflection of the stress and exhaustion that had accumulated over weeks. David accused her of being reckless, of risking everything with every move. She accused him of doubting her, of not trusting the bond that had formed between them in that terrible place. Each argument left them raw, but each reconciliation reminded them that their connection was their greatest strength, their fragile shield against a world gone mad. One evening, as they rested in a partially collapsed church, David took her hand in his eyes searching hers. "We have to decide," he said quietly. "We can't keep moving like this forever. One day someone will find us." Anna nodded, tears brimming. "I know, but what choice do we have? Where do we go when everything is burning behind us and the world ahead is just as dangerous?" David's gaze softened. "We go where we have to," he said, "together." The simplicity of the statement belied the complexity of their reality. Every mile they travelled, every risk they took, was an act of defiance against fate itself. And yet, even in the midst of fear, they found moments of tenderness, a shared smile, a whispered joke, a hand held for warmth. Those moments, fleeting as they were, reminded them that life could still exist amid the ruin. As the week wore on, they approached the outskirts of a larger town, partially occupied by Soviet forces. The streets were crowded with refugees, displaced families, and soldiers alike. Anna's heart pounded. The town offered both danger and opportunity, the chance to blend in but also the risk of discovery. They moved cautiously, avoiding the main roads, slipping into shadows and using the confusion of the crowd to their advantage. In a small alley, they found temporary refuge in the ruins of a store. David collapsed onto a pile of old sacks, his body trembling with exhaustion and fever. Anna tended to him, pressing a cloth soaked in water to his forehead, whispering reassurances even as her own hope wavered. "We're almost there," she said. "Just a little farther. We'll find safety." He tried to smile, but the effort was painful. "And if we don't?" Anna's hands froze on the cloth. "Then at least we tried," she said, voice breaking. She refused to let despair take hold, not yet. Outside, the distant sound of marching feet and shouted orders reminded them that danger was never far. The war would not wait for them to catch their breath. Every step forward was a gamble, and yet despite everything they pressed on, driven by something stronger than fear, by the fragile, forbidden love that had kept them alive. In that ruined town, surrounded by smoke, rubble, and the remnants of shattered lives, Anna and David made a quiet promise. Not a promise of a future they could see, but a promise of presence, of holding on to each other through whatever came next. The world might be collapsing around them, but in that moment, they had each other, and sometimes that was enough to survive. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of those who had walked before them, erasing the evidence of their passage. The war raged on, indifferent and relentless, but in the quiet of the ruined store, two souls who had survived unimaginable horrors clung to one another, and for the first time in months, allowed themselves a fragile sense of hope. Tomorrow, the fight would continue, the dangers would not relent. Yet tonight, in the shadow of destruction, Anna and David discovered a fleeting truth, that even in the heart of darkness, love could exist, forbidden though it might be, and that in the midst of chaos, the human spirit could still find a way to endure. The first light of dawn seeped through the shattered roof of the store, pale and cold, illuminating the dust and broken glass that littered the floor. Anna stirred beside David, whose breathing was uneven, shallow. Fever had returned overnight, and she feared that the long journey had weakened him beyond the point of recovery. Her hands shook as she checked his pulse, counting the beats in silence. Each one felt precarious, like a fragile thread holding them both to life. The war had already taken so much. Friends, families, homes, innocence. And now, in this fragile moment, it threatened to take the one thing she had fought to preserve. Him. The streets outside were alive with movement. Soviet patrols and German stragglers moved through the ruins in chaotic disarray. Refugees pushed carts and carried children, their faces pale and hollowed by hunger and fear. The town was a microcosm of the war itself, collapsing order, scattered authority, lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. Anna knew they could not remain here. Every passing hour increased the likelihood of discovery, yet she hesitated to move David. The thought of him collapsing on the road, too weak to continue, filled her with dread. She looked down at him, the fine lines of suffering etched across his face. He was alive, yes, but barely. She brushed damp hair from his forehead and whispered, "We can't stop." "Not now, we're almost there." David's eyes flickered open, pain and determination mingling in their depths. "Almost where?" he asked. His voice was hoarse, but there was a spark of curiosity, of life. Anna swallowed the lump in her throat. "Somewhere safe," she said, "somewhere the war hasn't reached." They left the store just after sunrise, slipping into the shadows along the narrow alleys. The world outside was unforgiving, streets littered with debris, broken vehicles, and the occasional lifeless body lying in twisted positions. The smell of smoke and decay hung heavy in the air. Each step was an act of defiance, a gamble with death. Yet Anna pressed forward, guided by a determination that had hardened in the crucible of their shared suffering. David followed, faltering occasionally, but his grip on her hand never wavered. As the day wore on, the landscape opened into fields scarred by artillery fire. The snow had melted in patches, leaving mud and frozen ground, a treacherous path for the weakened and exhausted. Anna helped David over every obstacle, supporting his weight when he faltered, and keeping him moving despite his protests. "I can walk," he insisted at one point, his voice weak but stubborn. "You don't have to carry me." She shook her head firmly. "I won't let you collapse out here, not when we're so close." By afternoon they reached the edge of a forest that promised both cover and peril. The trees were blackened from fire, some shattered, others leaning as if broken by invisible hands. Anna guided David into the shadows, keeping low and moving silently. The forest offered concealment, yes, but also the constant threat of discovery. Soviet scouts, German deserters, or even bandits could be lurking among the skeletal trunks. Every sound, a twig snapping, a bird taking flight, made her flinch, yet she forced herself to focus. Survival was a matter of concentration, of timing, of instinct honed through weeks of terror. Night fell, and with it, a fragile calm. They found a small hollow between two fallen trees, a space narrow enough to conceal them from any wandering eyes. Anna tended to David, wrapping him in her coat, pressing damp cloths to his forehead, whispering reassurances even as her own fear gnawed at her resolve. "We've come this far," she said softly. "We can't stop now. Tomorrow, we move again." David nodded, his eyes closing in exhaustion, yet there was a faint glimmer of trust in his gaze. In the quiet of the night, Anna allowed herself to reflect on everything that had brought them to this point. The camp, with its barbed wire and cruelty, the infirmary where she had first dared to defy orders, the countless days and nights spent hiding, running, surviving. Each moment had carved a bond between them stronger than fear, stronger than reason. She thought of the men and women who had not survived, whose names and faces haunted her dreams. And yet, in David's presence, she found the faintest echo of hope. A reminder that even in a world consumed by war, life and even love could endure. Dawn broke again with an eerie stillness. Resumed their trek, moving cautiously through the forest toward a distant village rumored to be largely untouched by the front lines. Anna guided David, supporting him at every step, whispering encouragements that were as much for herself as for him. The landscape, though scarred and desolate, offered signs of life. A fox darting through the underbrush, birds calling faintly from the branches, a small stream running beneath a frozen bridge. These small reminders of normalcy were both comforting and cruel, highlighting what had been lost. By late afternoon, they emerged from the forest onto a road leading to the village. The sight of smoke rising from chimneys and the distant sound of voices brought both relief and anxiety. They were close to safety, yet the danger of discovery was acute. Anna scanned the area carefully, noting the placement of soldiers and civilians, the patterns of movement, the possible routes of escape should they be noticed. Every detail mattered, every misstep could be fatal. They slipped into the outskirts of the village, finding temporary refuge in an abandoned shed. Anna laid David down gently, tending to his wounds and feeding him small sips of water and morsels of bread she had saved. He looked at her, eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. Anna shook her head. "You don't need to. Just survive. That's enough." For the first time in weeks, they allowed themselves to rest, to close their eyes without immediate fear of discovery. Yet even in this fragile safety, the world beyond the shed's walls pressed in. Shellfire could erupt, patrols could pass by, and the chaos of a collapsing front could swallow them at any moment. The uncertainty was relentless, a constant shadow over their fragile sanctuary. Over the following days, they moved cautiously through the village, blending in with the few remaining civilians, and using their wits to avoid soldiers from both sides. Anna's knowledge of medical procedures and her ability to speak German fluently allowed them to pose as refugees seeking shelter and care. David's strength gradually returned, though his cough remained a constant reminder of how close they had come to death. Each day was a negotiation with fate, a delicate dance of survival amid a world fractured by violence. Despite the dangers, moments of tenderness persisted. They shared stolen glances, whispered words of encouragement, and the occasional touch, a hand on a shoulder, a brush of fingers, a quiet embrace in the darkness. These small gestures became their lifeline, a reminder that humanity could persist even in the face of unrelenting horror. Anna often thought about the improbability of their survival, about the sheer luck and courage that had brought them this far. And yet in her heart, she knew it was more than luck. It was the bond between them, forged in fire and fear, that had carried them through. Weeks passed, and the war's front continued to shift. German forces were retreating in disarray, and Soviet units were advancing steadily, securing towns and villages along the way. Anna and David moved with them cautiously, avoiding direct encounters while seeking areas where they could find food, shelter, and most importantly, safety. Each successful day bolstered their hope, even as exhaustion and the ever-present threat of death weighed heavily on them. Finally, after weeks of constant flight and fear, they arrived at a remote village largely untouched by the conflict. Smoke rose from chimneys, children's laughter could be faintly heard, and life, in some small measure, had returned. Anna and David paused at the edge of the village, taking in the sight with a mixture of relief and disbelief. They had survived. They had endured. Against all odds, they had found a place where the war had not yet claimed everything. Anna turned to David, brushing a hand across his cheek. "We made it," she whispered, voice trembling. He took her hand, holding it tightly. "Together," he said. She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. They had escaped not just the physical dangers of the war, but also the moral and emotional abyss that had consumed so many around them. In each other, they had found redemption, love, and against all odds, hope. And as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the snow-melted fields, they allowed themselves to imagine a future, fragile, uncertain, but theirs. For the first time in months, they could breathe without immediate fear, and the world, for just a moment, seemed to hold the promise of peace. The war was not over, but they had survived, and in that survival they discovered the forbidden truth that had sustained them through the darkest days, that even in a world built on destruction, love could endure, quietly, defiantly, and brilliantly. They stayed in the village for weeks, slowly recovering their strength, blending into the quiet rhythm of civilian life, and rebuilding their shattered lives. Anna tended to the wounded villagers as best she could, using her skills to save lives rather than destroy them. David found work playing his violin in the evenings,